I am so proud to share our closing keynote speaker. She is the National Press Secretary for the Human Rights Campaign and the author of Tomorrow Will Be Different: Love, Loss, and the Fight for Trans Equality. In 2012, she made national headlines when she came out as transgender while serving as student body president at American University. A native of Wilmington, Delaware, she serves on the board of directors of Equality Delaware, the state's primary LGBTQ advocacy organization. In that capacity, she helped lead the successful effort to add gender identity and expression to her state's non-discrimination and hate crime laws. In 2018, she worked for Delaware Governor Jack Markell, and in 2010, for former Delaware Attorney General Beau Biden. Prior to coming to HRC, she worked on LGBTQ equality at the Center for American Progress and interned at the White House, the first out trans woman to do so. She became the first openly transgender person to address a major party political convention when she spoke at the 2016 Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia. Please welcome one of my heroes, the amazing Sarah McBride.
Oh, wow. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you so much, Alec. That was a wonderful introduction, and thank you so much, Jeff and David, for inviting me. How are you doing, NAGLREP? How are we doing? Come on, let's hear it again. It's the end of the day, but we're almost there. How are we doing? They say the most dangerous place in Palm Springs is between several hundred gay realtors and a networking event at a bar, so I hope that you all will be patient while I close out this afternoon's program. It is truly wonderful to be here with you today. My name is Sarah McBride. I am the National Press Secretary at the Human Rights Campaign, the nation's largest LGBTQ civil rights organization. And if you'll indulge me, I'd like to begin by telling you a bit about my own journey. I'm 28 years old, a native of Wilmington, Delaware. Thank you. Do we have someone here from Delaware? We have the entire state here. Fantastic. Thank you. I'm an LGBTQ advocate, a graduate of American University, and I'm a transgender woman. It took me 21 years to muster up the courage to say those last two words, transgender woman. Today, they are among my proudest identities, and this afternoon, I can stand before you as the person that I am. But of course, thank you. But of course, it hasn't always been that way. I remember as a child lying in my bed at night praying that I would wake up the next day and be myself, that my family would still be proud of me, and that I'd still be able to dream big dreams. When I was a young kid, I was a voracious reader of history. And as I read the history books, I marveled at the scope of social change that filled their pages. But I also became abundantly aware of the fact that no one quite like me had ever made it very far in them, at least no one who was out. And like so many LGBTQ young people, I feared that my dreams and my identity were mutually exclusive. And I wondered whether the heart of this country was big enough to love someone like me. And so I kept my identity inside. I told myself that if I could make it worthwhile for other people for me to stay in the closet by making a difference in my community, by making my family proud, that those things would somehow bring me the wholeness and completeness that I lacked. I think it's difficult in the fight for trans equality for folks who aren't transgender. The term is cisgender. For folks who aren't transgender to understand what it feels like to have a gender identity that differs from their sex assigned at birth. When it comes to sexual orientation, most straight people can understand what it feels like to love and to lust. And so they're able to enter into conversations around sexual orientation with a degree of empathy. But when it comes to trans identities, most people don't know what it feels like to have that incongruent feeling, to have a gender identity that differs from your sex assigned at birth. And for me, the closest thing that I can compare it to was a constant feeling of homesickness, an unwavering ache in the pit of my stomach that would only go away when I could be seen and affirmed as myself. And unlike geographic homesickness, which typically dissipates with time and getting used to your new surroundings, my homesickness only grew with time and distance. And as I graduated from high school and left for college, it was a pain that I thought about every single waking hour of every single day. As Alec mentioned, during my sophomore year of college, I was elected president of the student body at American University. And it was really, I hope everyone's okay. And it was through that experience. Totally ruined my jam there. But it was, let me not smile for a hot second. Okay. It was through that experience of making a difference in my own community that I realized that the things I told myself would alleviate that homesickness wouldn't actually. And so I came out to my parents on Christmas Day in 2011. It's always a holiday. And I came out to my friends during the following months. My parents struggled with the news at first, but they made very clear that they loved me and accepted me as the daughter that I am. So with the courage that my family and friends gave me, in May of 2012, during the last day of my term as president of the student body, I told my campus community, and I told the world, that I was really Sarah McBride in an op-ed in the student newspaper. Now, I have to admit, I was very scared about the reaction from my campus community. After all, it was 2012, a year before Time magazine dubbed America at the transgender tipping point. I didn't know how my campus would respond to a public trans student, let alone a publicly out transgender student body president. But all I got was support. One student on our campus commented that the overwhelming joy and celebration felt like we had won a sports championship. And I'm not quite sure how we would know what that feels like at American University, but it was just... We don't win many sports championships, but it was just an overwhelming sense of love and support. Now, I'm lucky. While coming out was the hardest thing I had ever done up until that point, it was still relatively easy compared to the experiences of most. And it didn't take me long for me to look around my campus, look around my community, and look around this country and see that my experiences were unique. But it shouldn't have to be that way. It shouldn't be a privilege to keep your family after you come out. It shouldn't be a privilege to be able to keep your housing or keep your job after you come out. And it certainly shouldn't be a privilege to be safe from violence. My own privileges, my own luck, my own family support, they all combined to create a support system that shielded me from some of the worst discrimination and violence that too often comes our community's way. Now, despite all of my own privilege, as I prepared to graduate from college, I was faced with the decision that no young person should have to make, but one that is all too common for LGBTQ people. The decision between going home to the state I love, Delaware, or being safe and secure. Like a majority of states to this day, Delaware at that time lacked clear protections from discrimination for transgender people. So, day in and day out during my senior year of college, I joined with other transgender people from my state, and we lobbied our legislators to change that. We'd write, we'd call, we'd travel to our state capital to do something simple but radical, to tell our stories. And in doing so, we demonstrated that behind this national conversation on transgender equality are real people who love and laugh, hope and dream, fear and cry just like everyone else. And when we did that, those legislators could no longer look us in the eyes and deny us the equal protection of the laws they swore to uphold. And in 2013, my little home state of Delaware made some history when we became the first and only state in the country to pass both marriage equality and trans equality in the exact same year. When advocates had tried to do that in other states, politicians had come back and told them, we're only going to do one gay bill a year. But But our legislators understood something that would become all the more poignant to me just 1 year later. They understood what Dr. King called the fierce urgency of now. For me, I come to this fight not just as someone who is transgender, but also as someone who's loved someone who's transgender. I met my future husband, Andy, fighting for equality, and we fell in love. As two young transgender people falling in love and fighting for the community we love, it seemed like we had a world of possibilities and potential before us. Andy was a transgender man about 2 years my senior. He had come out while still at college and eventually became an attorney working to expand access to health care for LGBTQ people. I quickly fell for Andy, for his courage, his optimism, his brilliance, and more than anything else, his unparalleled kindness. We dream of spending our lives together, of moving back to Delaware and of buying a home together, of raising a family and pursuing our dreams. But about 2 years after we started dating, Andy was diagnosed with cancer. He went through radiation, chemotherapy, and surgery. And after getting a clean bill of health, Andy received the news that every single cancer patient fears. His cancer was back, it had spread, and for him, it was terminal. When Andy found out that he didn't have much time left, he asked me to marry him. The answer was, of course, yes. We married on the rooftop of our apartment building in August of 2014. And then just 4 days after that, he passed away. Knowing and loving Andy left me profoundly changed. He taught me how to love and be loved. He taught me how to live the values I fight for at work in my own life. But more than anything else, my relationship with Andy underscored for me that change cannot come fast enough. That every day matters when it comes to building a world where every person can live their life to the fullest. After his passing, I went through the different stages of grief. Disbelief, sadness, and then anger. A quiet, unyielding anger. Now, I'm not an angry person by nature. Anger seems like such a waste of energy, and I find it difficult to be angry when there's no one to blame. I couldn't be angry at Andy's cancer. Those were just a cluster of cells. I couldn't be mad at his bad luck. There was no one to blame there. I was mad at society. I was angry that every single day when people are given the choice to love or hate, to build bridges or to build walls, far too many people choose to hate. Far too many choose to stand in the way of the pursuit of happiness for other people. Andy had come out at a relatively young age. He was supposed to have 3/4 of his life as his authentic self. But because of circumstances outside of his control, he had less than a quarter. Some people have even less time than that. Hate had kept Andy inside of himself for what turned out to be the vast majority of his life, which means that every single time LGBTQ people are asked to sit back and allow for a slow conversation to take place before we're treated with dignity, we are being asked to watch our one life pass by without the respect and fairness that every person deserves. And that is too much to ask of anyone. We are at a moment of choosing for our country. And we must decide whether we will be a nation that says there's only one way to love, only one way to look, and only one way to live, or whether we will be a nation where everyone has the freedom to live openly and equally. Over the last few years, we have seen attack after attack after attack on our community. Just weeks after taking office, the current occupant of the White House rescinded life-saving guidance promoting the protection of transgender students, targeting young people for bullying during the school day. He's appointed anti-equality extremists to the federal bench and to administration positions. The administration has granted government workers, federal contractors, and even healthcare professionals a sweeping license to discriminate against LGBTQ Americans. And in one of the most shameful moves yet, in a series of erratic tweets, the commander-in-chief targeted our own troops, transgender troops, for hate and for discrimination. Now, sadly, these attacks are not limited to the federal level. Over the last 5 years, we've seen between 100 and 150 anti-equality bills introduced in state legislatures across the country. Now, these bills typically fall into two separate categories. The first are bills that seek to license discrimination under the guise of religious freedom. We have to make something perfectly clear. Religious freedom is a fundamental American value. But what it has always been is a shield to protect religious minorities from government persecution, and what it should never be is a sword to inflict harm on marginalized people. The second kind of bill we're seeing are these so-called bathroom bills, anti-transgender bills that seek to ban transgender people from restrooms consistent with their gender identity. Of course, you all are familiar with the legislation in North Carolina. One of the most frequent questions I get from folks is, why are we all talking about bathrooms so much? And my response is threefold. The first is that transgender people would rather talk about anything but bathrooms. We want to talk about dignity and fairness throughout daily life, and yes, that includes restrooms, but it includes so much more. The second is that it's opponents of equality who keep bringing up bathrooms. And they do it for one reason, because of political messaging. They understand that everyone, including transgender people, feel a little bit vulnerable in restrooms. Everyone feels a little bit uncomfortable in restrooms. And when you can stoke fears and spread misinformation, when you can create caricatures and stoke fears around predators in restrooms, people say, you know what, I'm already a little bit uncomfortable. I don't want to be made more uncomfortable by the person in the stall next to me. Let's just slow this down. Let's just stop this. But the third point I make is that their rationale goes deeper than that. It's even more insidious than political messaging. And it's the reason why bathrooms have been at the center of every single battle for civil and human rights over the last 70 years. Bathrooms were at the center of the fight for the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s. They talked about bathrooms during the early days of the gay rights movement in the late 60s. They used bathrooms to stop the Equal Rights Amendment in the 70s. They talk about bathrooms and costs when it came to the Americans with Disabilities Act. And they're talking about bathrooms again today in the fight for trans equality. Because they understand that if they lose on everything, but win on bathrooms, if they can legalize, legislate, and in some cases mandate discrimination in restrooms, it becomes the closest thing to a silver bullet to legislating that particular community out of public life. Because if you cannot use a restroom that makes sense for you, if you can't use a restroom without fear of discrimination or violence, if you can't use a restroom that doesn't otherize or stigmatize you, it becomes much more difficult to go to school, to go to work, or to really even leave your home for more than a few hours. And so these efforts, while sounding silly, are nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt to push transgender people out of public life and back into the closet. Now, politicians like Donald Trump, Mike Pence, and so many other state-level politicians think they can get away with all of this hate by dividing and conquering, by driving the marginalized of America into our respective silos in this fight. But as one of my favorite poets, Audre Lorde, reminds us, there is no such thing as a single-issue cause because no one lives single-issue lives. It's why, as a community, we fought back when this administration tried to rip health care away from millions of Americans, including women, children, people with disabilities, and those living with HIV. It's why, as a community terrorized at Pulse, we must work to combat the scourge of gun violence plaguing America today. It's why when people, mostly women, share their stories of sexual assault, we say, we see you and we believe you. It's why we must recognize that when transphobia or homophobia mixes with misogyny and racism, it can have significant consequences. But NAGLREP, there is good news. And it's that every single time these politicians come for us, every single time they attack us, we end up having a conversation with this country that serves to open hearts, change minds, and in the end sows the seeds of the destruction of the politics of hate that these politicians seek to implement. Every single time they come for us, we end up growing stronger. We saw the power of our community when North Carolinians, after passage of HB 2, sent their governor, Pat McCrory, packing. We saw it in the Commonwealth of Virginia when the state legislature's self-designated chief homophobe and the sponsor of Virginia's bathroom bill was defeated by an out transgender woman named Danica Roem. We are going to need to fight like we've never fought before. Too much is at stake. Too much is on the line, and we know that our challenges did not begin in 2016. Even before the last election, despite our incredible progress as a community on issues like marriage equality and in states like the one we're in right now, to this day, as I mentioned, LGBTQ people in a majority of states and at the federal level still lack clear and explicit protections from discrimination in employment, in education, in healthcare, in the public square, and yes, in housing. Equality should not depend on a person's zip code. Whether a person can find a job or purchase a home free from discrimination should not depend on which side of a state line they find themselves on, which is why HRC's #1 priority when we elect a pro-equality Congress and a pro-equality president will be passage of the Equality Act, legislation that would protect LGBTQ people in every part of our lives, in every corner of this country. At the center of this legislation is the basic principle that no one should be denied a home simply because of their gender or the gender of the person they love. Expanding access to home ownership free from the fear of discrimination and mistreatment is a critical part of our fight for LGBTQ equality. LGBTQ home ownership goes beyond ensuring stable housing for a community that too often struggles with housing insecurity. It goes beyond ensuring equity for a community that struggles with credit. It's also about making clear our commitment and our roots in the communities we love. In coming out and living authentically, LGBTQ people have found home in our souls and in our identities. But our fight for equality is also about ensuring that we are able to find an affirming, safe, and inclusive place we can call home. Feeling safe and able to purchase a home is a central part of building that kind of world. And HRC is so proud to be working with NAGLREP to expand access to home ownership to LGBTQ people and to combat discrimination in housing throughout America. Your partnership, that's right, thank you. Your partnership and our mutual push to pass legislation like the Equality Act and to explicitly protect LGBTQ people from discrimination in housing and throughout daily life has been invaluable. And we need you now more than ever. Just 1 month ago, I became a first-time home buyer with the help, that's right, I'm the coveted millennial. I was done throwing away money with renting. I wanted to get a house and have some equity. Come on, it was a fantastic decision. I became a first-time home buyer with the help of an inclusive, incredible, and kind real estate agent. Someone who I felt safe with and who ensured that I could find and purchase a home in the state I always dreamed of living in. And so I'm so personally invested in the work you all are doing. Because beyond all of the legislative advocacy, the trails you all blaze in your industry as LGBTQ real estate professionals, the security you provide to your LGBTQ clients, the change you make in your own communities and neighborhoods sets forth, as RFK said, a tiny ripple of hope that when met with others creates a current so great that it can knock down the highest walls of oppression and persecution. I know right now, for those of us who are not living under a rock, for those of us who are on Twitter or watch cable news or following the news, I know it can feel like we're almost lost as a country, that our politics and our society is so broken that we can no longer do big things. But in moments like this, I am reminded of a lesson I learned in the final months of Andy's life. My brother Sean, who's a radiation oncologist, said to me in that last month that this is going to be incredibly difficult, but that I should look around me and take stock in the acts of amazing grace that would fill my life. And that grace, those miracles, they were everywhere. From our family and friends organizing a wedding for us in just 5 days, to Andy surviving long enough to make it to the rooftop of our building to marry. And those experiences, they taught me that all of us, even in the darkest moments and the most troubling times, we can all bear witness to acts of amazing grace. It reminded me that hope as an emotion, hope as a phenomenon only makes sense in the face of hardship. And that amazing grace, that unending hope, that is the story of our community. Through the flames of riots and the loss of a modern epidemic, the LGBTQ community has demonstrated time and time again that change is and always will be possible. I get to see it every single day in my job with HRC. I see it in the countless young transgender kids, young people who are insistent, consistent, and persistent in their gender identity, sometimes 8, 9, 10 years old, who I get to meet across the country. Young people like Libby, Max, and Marilyn, who I watched march into the Texas state capitol with their heads held high to demand dignity and fairness. Holding in one hand the knowledge of all of the hate that exists in this world, but holding in the other the knowledge that their identities are worth celebrating and that their lives matter. If these young people can hold these seemingly contradictory notions within their minds and in their souls, then surely we can do the same too. I see that change is possible in the 7-year-old transgender girl named Lulu, whose first question to me was so filled with pride that it would not have even made sense to my shame-filled 7-year-old self. She asked me quite simply, what's my favorite part about being transgender? I see that change is possible in the 13-year-old transgender girl named Stella, who, when I asked her what she wants to be when she grows up, she declared without any hesitation that she will be the first transgender president. What once seemed impossible, that we could live authentically and pursue our dreams, is now very real to kids like Stella. And the mere fact that these young people exist today demonstrates how far we've come. For we have, as a community, transformed impossibility into possibility into reality. We have seen that change is possible. But my friends, we have not come this far to stop now. After all, the fundamental truth remains that no one in the LGBTQ community is totally equal until all of us, from the gay Muslim refugee to the queer undocumented immigrant to the transgender woman of color living right here in California, until every single one of us is treated with dignity and fairness. And so let's keep up the fight. Let's meet those young people's dreams with our own determination, their perseverance with our own persistence. Let us reclaim the soul and story of this country from those who wish to roll back the clock on our progress, and let us finally build a world where no child must be forced to defend their dignity or give up on their dreams. And when we do, when that day comes, when our understanding of we the people finally includes all of us, a young LGBTQ student will grow up and learn about this struggle for justice and equality in their history books, and never have to know what this progress felt like to all of us, because they will never know anything different. And that will be because of advocates and activists who dreamed of a different world, LGBTQ people who marched and fought for a better tomorrow, allies who stood up and spoke out. It will be because of all of us. Thank you all very much. It's an honor to be with you tonight, and it's a privilege to be with you in this fight.
Sarah McBride! Sarah McBride 2020! We love you, Sarah! We love all of you! We'll see you next